This is knowledge, technical and precise. The ratio of meat to fat to berries has to be right or it spoils. The pounding has to be thorough or it doesn't bind together. She learned this from her mother, who learned it from hers. A chain of knowledge transmission stretching back thousands of generations. Nobody's eating alone. That almost never happens. Food is social, shared, distributed according to complex rules everyone understands implicitly. The hunter who made the kill yesterday isn't eating any more than anyone else. In fact, he might be eating less because that's how the system works. Kill an animal, share it with the group, and when someone else makes a kill, they'll share with you. This is insurance. Risk pooling. The social glue that keeps the group together. Children run back and forth, stealing bites from different adults, getting swatted away playfully, or having food pressed into their hands. Nobody's stingy with children. There's always enough to go around, and if there isn't, the adults eat less to make sure the young ones get fed. The meal isn't formal or ceremonial. People eat standing up, sitting down, walking around, checking tools, talking, laughing. But it serves crucial social functions anyway. Everyone's together, reinforcing bonds, sharing information, making plans for the day. Who's going to gather plants today? Who's going hunting? Who's staying back to work on that deer hide? These decisions happen organically, emerging from consensus rather than command. Someone mentions that the hazelnut trees by the northern grove should be producing well right now. Several women and older children volunteer to check. Someone else notes that there were deer tracks near the river yesterday. The hunters exchange glances, nod, start mentally preparing for a possible pursuit. Food preparation continues throughout this conversation. Hands are always busy. Someone's grinding seeds between stones. Someone else is sorting through dried herbs, discarding any that show signs of mold. A teenager is learning to use a sharp flint flake to slice thin strips of meat, preparing them for drying. These skills are crucial, and they're learned entirely through observation and practice. No written recipes, no formal instruction. Children watch adults, try to imitate, get corrected, try again. By the time they're adults themselves, they possess encyclopedic knowledge about food, which plants are edible, and when, how to identify them in different seasons, where to find them, how to process them, how to store them. This knowledge base is staggering. Ethnographic studies of modern hunter-gatherers show that they typically know detailed information about 200 to 300 plant species. They know which parts are edible, which require processing, which are medicinal, which are toxic, which are useful for other purposes like cordage or poison for arrowhead tips. Your ancestors almost certainly possessed similar knowledge. They had to. Their survival depended on it. Eat the wrong mushroom and you're dead. Fail to properly prepare certain roots and you're spending the next 3 days with debilitating cramps. This isn't casual knowledge. This is life and death information, carefully preserved and transmitted across generations. As the morning meal winds down, the fire is fed a few more sticks. The embers never go out entirely if someone's paying attention. Fire is too valuable, too difficult to make from scratch. Better to keep it alive, feeding it regularly, protecting it from rain and wind. Someone's always responsible for fire tending, usually rotating through different individuals. The meal wasn't elaborate, but it was adequate. Everyone's eaten something. Bellies are reasonably full. Energy levels are sufficient for whatever the day will bring, and that's really all that matters. Your ancestors weren't gourmets, but they understood nutrition in a deep, intuitive way. They knew that variety mattered, that different foods provided different benefits, that balance across days and weeks was more important than perfection at every meal. They were eating to live, but they were also living to eat. Food was pleasure, even when it was simple. The satisfaction of cracking a nut perfectly, the sweetness of ripe berries, the rich fattiness of bone marrow roasted over fire. These weren't just calories, they were experiences, shared moments, connections to the landscape and to each other. And now, with morning fully arrived and stomachs filled, it's time to get to work. The day's real activities are about to begin. Here's what nobody tells you about prehistoric life. The hunt gets all the glory. The dramatic confrontations with mammoths, the coordinated takedowns of deer, the dangerous face-offs with predators. That's what captures our imagination, what ends up in museums and documentaries. But here's the truth that would have been obvious to anyone actually living 40,000 years ago. Hunting was the exception. Gathering was the rule. On any given day, somewhere between 60 and 80% of your calories came from plants. Roots, tubers, nuts, seeds, berries, leaves, flowers. The percentage varied by season and location. Groups living near coastlines might have gotten more protein from shellfish. Communities in northern regions might have relied more heavily on meat during long winters. But for most human populations, most of the time, plants were what kept you alive. This wasn't because our ancestors were particularly fond of vegetables. It was simple evolutionary math. A successful hunt might provide enough meat to feed your band for several days, but hunts failed more often than they succeeded. Animals are fast, unpredictable, and dangerous. They require hours of tracking, careful coordination, and considerable luck. Plants, meanwhile, stay put. They're exactly where you left them last season, growing in predictable patterns that anyone with enough knowledge could learn to read. So while the hunters were out there hoping for glory, the majority of your band was engaged in the real work of survival, walking the landscape with practiced eyes, reading signs invisible to the untrained, collecting the foods that would actually end up in tonight's meal. Now here's where we need to be careful about assumptions. For decades, anthropologists told a neat story about prehistoric gender roles. Men hunted, women gathered. It was presented as natural, inevitable, maybe even biologically determined. But the evidence tells a more complicated story. Yes, in many prehistoric societies, women and older children did most of the gathering while men specialized in hunting. But not all societies, not even most necessarily. Archaeological evidence from various sites shows women buried with hunting weapons. Isotope analysis of ancient bones reveals some women ate diets as meat-heavy as any male hunter. Some groups practiced communal hunting where everyone participated. Others had specialized. Gatherers of both sexes who spent their entire lives perfecting knowledge of plants. The truth is probably this. Prehistoric societies were pragmatic. They organized labor in ways that made sense for their specific circumstances. In some groups, women who were pregnant or nursing might have focused more on gathering because it was compatible with carrying infants. In others, post-reproductive women might have become the most valuable members of the community, precisely because they could hunt without the constraints of childbearing. The key point is this. Don't imagine gathering as something less important or prestigious than hunting. It was specialist knowledge that required years of training, and it kept everyone alive. So picture yourself on that gathering expedition. It's mid-morning now. The sun has been up for a few hours, burning off the morning mist. You're heading out with 3 other people, your mother's sister, who knows the plant locations better than anyone in your band. A younger cousin, maybe 11 years old, who's learning the routes and the knowledge. And your own child, 3 years old, strapped to your back in a sling made from carefully softened deer hide. You're not just wandering randomly. You're following a mental map that's been built up over years of observation. The oak grove 3 miles north should have acorns ready for collection right now. The patch of wild onions near the creek will be past their prime, but there's a stand of cattails just beyond it where you can dig up the starchy roots. If you're lucky, you might find a beehive with honey. If you're really lucky, birds' eggs. The walk itself is no casual stroll. You're covering somewhere between 5 and 10 miles today, most of it over terrain that would challenge modern hikers. Rocky hillsides, thick underbrush, streams to ford, slopes to climb. You're doing all of this while carrying a child, plus the tools of your trade, a digging stick, fire-hardened and worn smooth from use, several baskets woven from plant fibers nested inside each other, a leather bag for small finds, maybe a stone knife tucked into a belt made from twisted plant fibers. But here's what makes gathering so different from hunting. It's not about adrenaline or drama. It's about attention. You're reading the landscape like a book, noticing details that would be invisible to outsiders. The slight discoloration of soil that indicates wild tubers growing below. The pattern of animal tracks that suggest a fruit tree nearby. The specific angle of sunlight that tells you which side of the hill will have ripe berries. Your aunt stops at what looks like an unremarkable patch of ground. But she sees something you're still learning to recognize. A particular type of grass that always grows near edible roots. She drives her digging stick into the earth, probing carefully. 3 inches down, she strikes something solid. She works the stick around it, loosening the soil, then reaches in with her hands and pulls up a tuber the size of your fist. It's pale, knobbly, completely unappetizing to look at. But you know from experience that when it's roasted in tonight's fire coals, it'll be sweet and filling. She hands it to you. You place it carefully in your basket. She digs again. Another tuber and another. This spot is rich. In 10 minutes, you've collected enough tubers to feed everyone tonight. maybe with leftovers for tomorrow, but you're not done. Your aunt knows these plants by heart. More importantly, she knows their stories. The stories are how you remember the knowledge. She tells your young cousin about the time her grandmother got terribly sick from eating a root that looked almost exactly like this one but had slightly different leaves. She points out the distinction. 3 veins in the leaf instead of 5. That tiny difference means the other plant would kill you, shutting down your breathing within hours. This is education, but it's nothing like sitting in a classroom. It's survival knowledge passed down through stories, demonstrated with actual plants, reinforced through years of observation. Your cousin will learn hundreds of these lessons. By the time she's your age, she'll know perhaps 300 different plant species by sight, by season, by location. She'll know which ones are edible, which ones are medicinal, which ones will kill. She'll know when to harvest each one, how to prepare it, what it's useful for. Modern botanists spend years in university learning to identify plants. Your ancestors learned it by necessity, starting in early childhood, because getting it wrong could mean death. The group moves on. You wade through a shallow stream, the cold water shocking against your legs. On the far bank, your aunt spots something that makes her smile, mushrooms growing in a fallen log. She approaches carefully, examines them from multiple angles, even smells them. Mushrooms are tricky, some are nutritious and delicious, others cause violent illness, a few will kill you. She picks 3, leaves the rest. She's certain about these ones, but caution is always wise. Hours pass in this rhythm, walking, observing, collecting. The baby on your back has fallen asleep, lulled by the gentle motion. Your baskets are getting heavier, wild grapes still slightly tart but edible, seeds from a grass that you'll grind into flour back at camp, bark from a specific tree that, when boiled, makes a tea that reduces fever. Your aunt collects this last one carefully, never taking so much that she damages the tree. She learned long ago that you have to think about next season, next year, the generations coming after you. This is sustainable harvesting, though your ancestors didn't have a word for it. They just knew that if you stripped a plant bare, it wouldn't be there next time you needed it. The groups that learned this lesson survived. The ones that didn't face starvation when resources ran out. By early afternoon, you're miles from camp. Your legs are tired, your shoulders ache from the weight of your baskets. But there's something almost meditative about this work. No rush, no pressure, just the steady rhythm of walking and gathering, the warmth of the sun, the sound of birds calling to each other in the canopy above. You're completely present in a way that modern humans rarely experience. Every sense is engaged. You're listening for the rustle of animals, watching for the shimmer of water that indicates a stream ahead, smelling the air for smoke that might mean another band is camping nearby. Your younger cousin asks a question. She spotted a plant with bright red berries and wants to know if they're safe to eat. Your aunt doesn't just answer. She walks over, examines the plant, and launches into another story about how her mother once found these berries during a harsh winter, when other food was scarce, how they sustained the band through 3 days of blizzard, how you have to be careful because birds can eat them safely, but humans need to cook them first, otherwise they cause stomach cramps. The knowledge transfer continues. Every plant is a lesson. Every location is a memory. This landscape isn't just territory to your people, it's a library. Every tree, every stone, every stream carries information that's been accumulated over generations. Your ancestors didn't write anything down, but they were far from ignorant. They were repositories of sophisticated ecological knowledge that rivaled anything a modern scientist could compile. Finally, late in the afternoon, the group turns back toward camp. Your baskets are full now, heavy with food that will feed your entire band tonight. You've walked maybe 8 miles total. Your feet hurt. Your back aches. The baby has woken up and is fussing, wanting to be fed. But you're satisfied. This is good work. Important work. The kind of work that keeps everyone alive. When you get back to camp, there will be no fanfare. Nobody's going to celebrate your return the way they celebrate a successful hunt. But everyone knows the reality. The hunters might come back empty-handed tonight. They often do. But you brought food. Reliable, nutritious, life-sustaining food. And tomorrow you'll go out and do it again. This is the rhythm that sustained humanity for hundreds of thousands of years. Not the dramatic moments, the steady, patient, knowledgeable work of gathering. Your ancestors were reading the landscape in ways we've almost completely forgotten. They were paying attention to nature with an intensity that most modern humans never experience, and they were doing it not as a hobby or a spiritual practice, but as the fundamental work of survival. Here's something that might surprise you. Your ancestor probably wasn't hunting today, or yesterday, maybe not even this week. We have this image of prehistoric life as a constant struggle. Early humans waking up each morning and immediately heading out to chase down mammoths or wrestle with saber-toothed cats. Hollywood loves this narrative. Man versus beast, daily death matches for survival. But the reality was far more interesting and far more strategic. Hunting for early humans wasn't a daily grind. It was an occasional high-stakes event that required immense planning, patience, and, more often than not, ended in failure. A successful hunt might happen every few days if you were lucky, every few weeks if you weren't. The rest of the time, you were preparing, planning, tracking, and most importantly, relying on gathering to fill your stomach. But when the hunt did happen, it was extraordinary. Let's say today is one of those days. The signs have been building for a while. Yesterday, scouts spotted fresh tracks from a small herd of antelope moving through a valley about 5 miles from camp. The animals are heading toward a seasonal water source. Following patterns your people have observed for generations, the timing is right, the weather is clear, and, most crucially, several experienced hunters are available and healthy enough to make the attempt. This is how it begins, not with sudden impulse, but with careful deliberation. The group gathers in the early morning, 6 men and 2 women, all proven trackers and hunters. They discuss the plan using a combination of spoken language and hand signals that have been refined over thousands of years. Who will take which position? Where are the animals likely to go? What are the fallback options if things don't work out? They carry spears, each one a masterpiece of prehistoric engineering that took days to create. The wooden shaft carefully straightened over fire and seasoned for months to prevent warping. The stone point napped from high-quality flint traded from a quarry 200 miles away, hafted with plant resin and sinew that's been processed and dried to create a bond stronger than most modern adhesives. Some of the hunters also carry atlatls, spear throwers that use leverage to triple the velocity and distance of a thrown spear. This technology is relatively new, maybe only a few thousand years old in your region, but it's revolutionizing hunting in the same way the bow will revolutionize it thousands of years from now. The group moves out and immediately you notice something. They're not rushing. There's no frantic chase, no dramatic sprint across the savannah. Instead, they're walking at a steady, sustainable pace, reading the landscape as they go. This is where hunting becomes a science. One of the trackers kneels beside a depression in the sandy soil. He studies it for several long moments, then signals to the others. The track is fresh, probably from this morning. The depth and clarity tell him the animal was moving at a walk, not alarmed. The spacing between tracks indicates it's a young adult. Healthy, good size, but not too large to bring down. He can tell all this from a single hoof print. This isn't magic. It's pattern recognition honed over a lifetime of observation. Your people have been tracking animals since childhood, learning to read the landscape the way you might read a book. Every broken twig, every disturbed pebble, every scratch on a rock face tells part of the story. Where the animals went, how fast they were moving, how long ago they passed, whether they were calm or alarmed. The group follows the trail for hours. No rushing, just steady walking, periodically stopping to check signs and adjust their strategy. This is the part of hunting that never makes it into the dramatic retellings, the long, patient stalking that requires more mental endurance than physical strength. Around midday, they spot the herd, 8 antelope grazing in a shallow valley near a waterhole. Now comes the critical decision point. Do they attempt an ambush, trying to get close enough for spear range? Or do they use the technique that humans, uniquely among all predators, have perfected? They choose persistence hunting. Here's what makes humans terrifying predators. We can't outrun almost any animal in a sprint. A healthy antelope can hit 50 metapod. A human tops out around 15. But we have something no other animal has. We can run for hours in the heat of the day without overheating. Thanks to our nearly hairless bodies and incredible capacity for sweating, most animals, covered in fur and lacking efficient cooling systems, have to stop and rest after intense exertion, or they'll literally cook from the inside. The hunters spread out and begin to jog toward the herd. Not a sprint, just a steady, sustainable trot. The antelope spot them immediately and bolt, They're gone in seconds, disappearing over a ridge. But the humans don't stop. They follow the tracks at that same steady pace, reading the signs, keeping up the pressure. An hour passes, 2 hours. The sun is brutal now, the kind of heat that would drop most predators in their tracks. But the humans keep moving, their bodies designed for exactly this kind of endurance. They're sweating profusely, yes, but that's the point. Each drop of moisture evaporating from their skin is carrying away heat that would otherwise build up and shut down their muscles. They find the herd again. The antelope run, but they're showing signs of stress now. Their tongues are hanging out. They're panting heavily. They can't cool down fast enough. The chase continues. 3 hours, 4. The trackers are rotating the lead position, allowing individuals to drop back and recover slightly while others maintain the pressure. This is cooperative hunting at its finest. No single human could do this alone, but a coordinated group, communicating constantly, sharing the effort, can accomplish what seems impossible. Finally, after nearly 5 hours, they close in on a single antelope that's separated from the herd. The animal is stumbling now, its cooling system overwhelmed, its muscles beginning to fail from the combination of heat and exhaustion. One hunter moves in, close enough for a spear throw. The weapon flies true, striking behind the shoulder. Moments later, it's over. The hunters stand around the fallen animal, not cheering or celebrating yet. First comes the practical work. One of them makes a quick, precise cut and offers a prayer or acknowledgement. We can't know the exact words or gestures, but evidence from multiple prehistoric sites suggests early humans performed some kind of ritual around successful kills, respect for the animal that gave its life, gratitude to whatever spirits or forces they believed governed the hunt. Then comes the butchering, which is itself a sophisticated technical operation. These hunters know animal anatomy better than most modern surgeons know human anatomy, every muscle group, every organ, every useful piece. They work quickly and efficiently. The hide comes off in one piece, valuable for clothing and shelter. The choicest cuts of meat are separated for immediate consumption and for carrying back to camp. Organs that spoil quickly are prepared for eating on site. Nothing is wasted. Even the bones will eventually be cracked open for their marrow, one of the most nutrient-dense foods available. But here's the problem. They're 5 miles from camp and they've just produced several hundred pounds of meat and materials. They can't carry it all in one trip, and leaving meat unattended means lions, hyenas, and vultures will claim it within hours. This is where the social dimension of hunting becomes crucial. 2 runners head back to camp at speed to bring reinforcements. The rest stay with the kill, building a fire to keep scavengers at bay, and beginning the process of smoking some of the meat for preservation. Within a few hours, more people arrive from camp. Elders, children, old enough to help carry, nursing mothers who left their infants with relatives. Everyone participates in the harvest. The trip back to camp is a celebration. Successful hunts are rare enough that they're social. Events. There will be feasting tonight. Stories told around the fire, probably dancing and music. The hunters will recount the chase in detail, and in the telling, it will become part of the community's collective memory. Another story to teach young people about strategy, persistence, and cooperation. But let's be clear about something. This doesn't happen every day or even every week. Between successful hunts, there are dozens of failed attempts, tracks that lead nowhere, animals that prove too fast or too alert, injuries that force the hunters to turn back, hunts that simply don't work out despite everyone doing everything right. And this is crucial to understanding prehistoric life. Hunting was important, absolutely. It provided concentrated protein and fat that gathering alone couldn't match. The social bonds formed during cooperative hunts helped cement group cohesion. The skills required, tracking, weapon crafting, strategic planning, pushed the development of human intelligence and communication. But hunting was never the main source of calories for most prehistoric groups. That honor went to gathering, which happened every day, provided the majority of nutrition, and didn't require risking life and limb. Hunting was the occasional glory, the high-stakes gamble that sometimes paid off spectacularly. What made early humans successful wasn't that they were the best hunters, it's that they were good enough at hunting while also being excellent at everything else: gathering, tool-making, social cooperation, adapting to new environments. They were generalists who could deploy specialist skills when needed, and the hunt, when it succeeded, was just one thread in the complex tapestry of prehistoric survival. Tomorrow, Whether today's hunt succeeded or failed, there would still be roots to dig, nuts to gather, tools to repair, children to teach, and the endless patient work of staying alive in a world that was beautiful, abundant, and occasionally willing to reward the clever, the persistent, and the cooperative. By midday, the camp was alive with a sound that would have been instantly recognizable to any craftsperson throughout history: the rhythmic tap, tap, tap of stone on stone. Not loud, not violent, just persistent, purposeful. The sound of someone making something that didn't exist before. Your aunt was sitting on a flat rock near the central fire, a hammerstone in one hand and a piece of flint in the other. Every few seconds she'd strike the flint at precisely the right angle, sending a small flake spinning off into the dust. Around her, a scatter of rejected pieces and failed attempts, the archaeological debris that would still be visible 40,000 years later, telling stories to people who'd learned to read stone. This wasn't occasional work. This was daily maintenance, essential as eating or sleeping, because tools didn't last forever. That spear point you used yesterday? It might have chipped when it hit bone. The scraper someone used to process that hide last week? Its edge was dull now, almost useless. In a world without metal, without mass production, without the ability to simply buy replacements, you made your tools or you didn't survive. But here's what's remarkable. Stone tool making, what archaeologists call knapping, wasn't something you just figured out one afternoon. It was a skill that took years to master, requiring an understanding of stone properties that bordered on intimate knowledge. Different rocks fractured in different ways. Flint was predictable. Obsidian was sharp but fragile. Chert was reliable but harder to work. You had to know where to find good stone, how to test it, how to recognize quality before you invested hours of work. Watch your aunt working, and you'd see expertise that took a lifetime to acquire. She wasn't just hitting rocks together randomly, she was reading the stone, seeing lines of potential fracture invisible to untrained eyes. Each strike was calculated. Too hard and the piece would shatter. Too soft and nothing would happen. The angle had to be exact. The point of impact precisely chosen. It was geometry and physics executed entirely through intuition and muscle memory. The process was called the prepared core technique, and it represented centuries of accumulated knowledge. Your aunt had shaped this piece of flint over the past hour, carefully removing flakes to create a core with just the right shape and angle. Now she was ready for the payoff. One perfect strike, and a long, thin blade detached from the core, sharp enough to slice through hide or meat with minimal pressure. She examined it critically, running her thumb along the edge, then nodded. Good enough. But she wasn't done. The blade needed hafting, attachment to a handle that would make it actually useful. This was where craft became art. She had prepared a wooden handle earlier, a piece of hardwood with a slot carved into one end. Now she pulled out a small, leather pouch containing pine resin she'd collected and heated until it became sticky, mixed with a bit of charcoal and crushed bone for strength. This would become the prehistoric equivalent of superglue. Watching her work, you'd notice something fascinating. She didn't need to think about most of the steps. Her hands moved automatically through processes she'd performed thousands of times. Heat the resin over the fire, apply it to the handle slot, position the blade precisely, wrap the joint with thin strips of sinew that would shrink and tighten as they dried. The entire process took maybe 10 minutes, but it drew on decades of experience and generations of accumulated knowledge. Near her, your brother was working on a different problem entirely. He had a piece of antler from that deer killed 3 days ago, and he was slowly, patiently carving it into a spear point. This was different from stonework. Antler was organic, flexible, capable of taking impacts that would shatter stone. But it was also harder to shape, requiring different tools and different techniques. He was using a stone baron, a chisel-like tool to scrape and carve the antler. The work was tedious, producing a constant soft scraping sound that formed a counterpoint to your aunt's rhythmic knapping. Thin curls of antler fell away with each stroke, accumulating in a small pile at his feet. Every so often he'd stop and test the point against his thumb, checking for sharpness and balance. This point would be different from the stone-tipped spears most hunters used. Lighter, more flexible, it could be thrown farther and was less likely to break on impact. But it took hours to make. An antler was only available when someone successfully hunted deer or similar animals. Stone was everywhere, Antler was precious. So you used it carefully for special purposes, and you made sure everyone in the group knew who'd made what. Because here's something the archaeological record has only recently revealed. Prehistoric craftspeople took pride in their work. We know this because we find tools that are more beautiful than they needed to be. Stone points shaped with perfect symmetry, even though asymmetrical points would work just as well. Bone needles decorated with tiny carved patterns. Antler spear throwers carved into the shapes of animals. Nobody decorates something purely functional unless they care about aesthetics, unless they want their work to be recognizable, admired. Your brother's spear point would be efficient, yes, but it would also be beautiful. Because when you carried it, when you used it to feed your family, you wanted everyone to know who'd made it. Status, reputation, identity, all conveyed through craftsmanship. Across the camp, 3 women were working on an equally essential task: clothing production. One was scraping a deer hide stretched across a wooden frame, using a stone scraper to remove every trace of fat and membrane from the inner surface. The sound was distinctive, a rhythmic scraping that carried across the camp. Her hands moved in steady strokes, overlapping each path slightly to ensure complete coverage. This wasn't quick work. A single hide might require hours of scraping, and even then, you weren't done. The hide had to be treated either by smoking it over a fire or by rubbing it with a mixture of brain tissue and fat that prevented it from becoming stiff when it dried. The brain tanning process was chemistry without labs, developed through centuries of trial and error. Someone, somehow, had figured out that brains contained exactly the right compounds to preserve leather. Maybe they discovered it by accident, maybe through systematic experimentation. Either way, the knowledge had been passed down parent to child for generations. Nearby, her sister was working on a hide that had already been tanned. She had a bone awl, a pointed tool for punching holes, and she was slowly, methodically creating a garment. Punch a hole, thread sinew through it, punch another hole. The stitching was crude by modern standards but remarkably effective. These clothes would be warm, durable and flexible. They'd last for seasons, maybe years, protecting their wearers from cold that could kill in hours. The third woman was doing something that would have seemed impossible to earlier humans. She was sewing with an actual needle, a tiny piece of bone drilled with a hole at one end, threaded with sinew. This technology was less than 20,000 years old in your time, a recent innovation that had revolutionized clothing production. With needles, you could make clothes that actually fit, that could be tailored to individual bodies, that could be decorated with sewn-on beads or dyed leather strips. She was making winter clothing for her daughter, fur-lined and layered, warm enough for the brutal cold that would come in a few months. The little girl sat nearby, watching intently, occasionally trying to help. This was how knowledge transferred, not through formal instruction, but through constant observation and imitation. By the time the girl was 10, she'd be competent at basic hide work. By 20, she might be one of the most skilled leather workers in the group. But clothing and tools weren't the only things being made. An older man sat by himself, working on something smaller, more delicate. He had a collection of shells he'd traded for last summer, when a neighbouring group had visited from the coast 3 weeks' walk away. Now he was drilling tiny holes in them with a stone drill, a painstaking process that required steady hands and infinite patience. These would become beads, strung on plant fibre cord to make necklaces or bracelets. Purely decorative, purely social. Nobody needed jewellery to survive, but humans had been making it for at least 100,000 years, probably longer. Because survival wasn't enough. We needed beauty, status markers, ways to express identity and affiliation. Those beads said, I have connections to the coast, I have time to make beautiful things, I value aesthetics. All of that conveyed through pierced shells on a string. What's striking about all this activity is the specialization. Not everyone was good at everything. Your aunt had spent decades mastering stonework and was genuinely expert at it. Your brother excelled at antler and bone carving, but was merely adequate at napping. The woman making winter clothing was the best leather worker in the group, and when her skills were needed, others contributed food or help with other tasks in exchange. This wasn't quite a market economy, but it was close. A recognition that different people had different talents, and that the group benefited when people specialized. It was also the foundation for something that would become increasingly important: social complexity. In groups where everyone could do everything equally well, There wasn't much basis for hierarchy or status differentiation, but when individuals developed specialized skills that others needed, power dynamics shifted. The best toolmaker, the best leather worker, the best artist, they all gained influence that transcended simple physical strength or hunting ability. And everywhere, children watched. A boy of maybe 8 sat near your aunt trying to replicate her movements with his own small stones. Most of his attempts failed, producing nothing useful, but she encouraged him anyway. Occasionally she'd take his hand, guide his strikes, show him the right angle. This was education, prehistoric style. No schools, no formal curriculum, just constant observation and practice under the guidance of experts. By the time the boy was 15, he might be competent at basic toolmaking. By 25, if he had talent and dedication, he might be expert enough to teach others, and the knowledge would flow forward another generation, each one adding small refinements, tiny improvements that would accumulate over centuries, into technological revolutions. The afternoon sun moved across the sky, and the sounds of craft continued. Tapping, scraping, the crackle of fire, occasional conversation, creating the material culture that made human life possible. Building, one patient stroke at a time, the foundation for everything that would come after. If you imagine early humans as exhausted, half-starved figures trudging endlessly across the landscape, constantly hunting, constantly gathering, constantly on the brink of collapse, you're not alone. That image has been drilled into us for decades. Life before civilization, we're told, was nasty, brutish, and short. A constant struggle for survival, with no time for anything except work. But when anthropologists started living with modern hunter-gatherer societies and actually counting how they spent their time, a very different picture emerged. On average, adults in many foraging societies only spend about 4 to 6 hours a day on what we'd call work, finding food, preparing it, maintaining tools, basic camp upkeep. The rest of the day isn't filled with frantic scrambling. It's filled with nothing in particular. Resting. This is knowledge, technical and precise. The ratio of meat to fat to berries has to be right or it spoils. The pounding has to be thorough or it doesn't bind together. She learned this from her mother, who learned it from hers, a chain of knowledge transmission stretching back thousands of generations. Nobody's eating alone. That almost never happens. Food is social, shared, distributed according to complex rules everyone understands implicitly. The hunter who made the kill yesterday isn't eating any more than anyone else. In fact, he might be eating less because that's how the system works. Kill an animal, share it with the group, and when someone else makes a kill, they'll share with you. This is insurance, risk pooling, the social glue that keeps the group together. Children run back and forth, stealing, bites from different adults, getting swatted away playfully or having food pressed into their hands. Nobody's stingy with children. There's always enough to go around, and if there isn't, the adults eat less to make sure the young ones get fed. The meal isn't formal or ceremonial. People eat standing up, sitting down, walking around, checking tools, talking, laughing, but it serves crucial social functions anyway. Everyone's together, reinforcing bonds, sharing information, making plans for the day, who's going to gather plants today, who's going hunting, who's staying back to work on that deer hide. These decisions happen organically, emerging from consensus rather than command. Someone mentions that the hazelnut trees by the northern grove should be producing well right now. Several women and older children volunteer to check. Someone else notes that there were deer tracks near the river yesterday. The hunters exchange glances, nod, start mentally preparing for a possible pursuit. Food preparation continues throughout this conversation. Hands are always busy. Someone's grinding seeds between stones. Someone else is sorting through dried herbs, discarding any that show signs of mold. A teenager is learning to use a sharp flint flake to slice thin strips of meat, preparing them for drying. These skills are crucial, and they're learned entirely through observation and practice. No written recipes, no formal instruction. Children watch adults, try to imitate, get corrected, try again. By the time they're adults themselves, they possess encyclopedic knowledge about food, which plants are edible and when, how to identify them in different seasons, where to find them, how to process them, how to store them. This knowledge base is staggering. Ethnographic studies of modern hunter-gatherers show that they typically know detailed information about 200 to 300 plant species. They know which parts are edible, which require processing, which are medicinal, which are toxic, which are useful for other purposes like cordage or poison for arrowhead tips. Your ancestors almost certainly possessed similar knowledge. They had to. Their survival depended on it. Eat the wrong mushroom and you're dead. Fail to properly prepare certain roots and you're spending the next 3 days with debilitating cramps. This isn't casual knowledge. This is life and death information, carefully preserved and transmitted across generations. As the morning meal winds down, the fire is fed a few more sticks. The embers never go out entirely if someone's paying attention. Fire is too valuable, too difficult to make from scratch. Better to keep it alive, feeding it regularly, protecting it from rain and wind. Someone's always responsible for fire tending, usually rotating through different individuals. The meal wasn't elaborate, but it was adequate. Everyone's eaten something. Bellies are reasonably full. Energy levels are sufficient for whatever the day will bring. And that's really all that matters. Your ancestors weren't gourmets, but they understood nutrition in a deep, intuitive way. They knew that variety mattered, that different foods provided different benefits, that balance across days and weeks was more important than perfection at every meal. They were eating to live, but they were also living to eat. Food was pleasure, even when it was simple. The satisfaction of cracking a nut perfectly, the sweetness of ripe berries, the rich fattiness of bone marrow roasted over fire. These weren't just calories, they were experiences, shared moments, connections to the landscape and to each other. And now, with morning fully arrived and stomachs filled, it's time to get to work. The day's real activities are about to begin. Here's what nobody tells you about prehistoric life. The hunt gets all the glory. The dramatic confrontations with mammoths, the coordinated takedowns of deer, the dangerous face-offs with predators, that's what captures our imagination, what ends up in museums and documentaries. But here's the truth that would have been obvious to anyone actually living 40,000 years ago. Hunting was the exception. Gathering was the rule. On any given day, somewhere between 60 and 80% of your calories came from plants. Roots, tubers, nuts, seeds, berries, leaves, flowers. The percentage varied by season and location. Groups living near coastlines might have gotten more protein from shellfish. Communities in northern regions might have relied more heavily on meat during long winters, but for most human populations, most of the time, plants were what kept you alive. This wasn't because our ancestors were particularly fond of vegetables, it was simple evolutionary math. A successful hunt might provide enough meat to feed your band for several days, but hunts failed more often than they succeeded. Animals are fast, unpredictable, and dangerous. They require hours of tracking, careful coordination, and considerable luck. Plants, meanwhile, stay put. They're exactly where you left them last season, growing a day. 40,000 years ago. Life before civilization. Picture consciousness returning slowly. No jarring alarm, no glowing screen demanding attention, no rush of obligations flooding your mind the moment awareness returns. Instead, you drift back into the world gradually, pulled by the soft grey light filtering through the entrance of your rock shelter. Cool air touches your skin, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Nearby you hear the gentle murmur of voices as others begin to wake. A baby's brief cry, then silence. Someone's quiet laughter. Beyond the shelter, birds call to each other in the growing dawn. This is how humans awakened for hundreds of thousands of years. This was morning. Welcome to 40,000 years ago, give or take a few millennia. You're Homo sapiens, living somewhere we'd now call Europe, Africa, or Asia. Anatomically, you're identical to any person alive today, same. Brain capacity, same physical structure, same potential for language, thought, and emotion. But your daily reality, so alien to ours that it's almost impossible to fully grasp. So here's the question that fascinates archaeologists and anthropologists endlessly. What did you actually do all day? We carry this image, burned into our consciousness by countless films and documentaries. Brutish cavemen constantly fleeing from saber-toothed predators, spending every waking hour desperately searching for food, always teetering on the edge of starvation, living nasty, brutish, and short lives of pure survival. That's the narrative, right? Prehistoric existence as one endless nightmare of hardship and terror. Except it's almost entirely wrong. The archaeological evidence reveals a radically different story. Early humans weren't merely surviving, they were living. They had rich social lives, abundant leisure time, art, music, spirituality, humour. They told stories around fires, they decorated, their bodies. They carved intricate figurines and painted breathtaking images on cave walls. They cared for their elderly and disabled. They buried their dead with ceremony and grave goods. They had culture, complex, sophisticated culture we're only beginning to understand. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we can discuss cave paintings and ritual burials, we need to understand the fundamentals. What did a typical day actually look like? How did our ancestors spend their time when there were no jobs to commute to, no bills to pay, no grocery stores to visit, when survival meant something entirely different than it does today? The truth might surprise you. Early humans probably worked less than you do. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies, which offer our best window into prehistoric lifestyles, show that people typically spent only 4 to 6 hours daily on subsistence activities. Gathering food, hunting, preparing meals, maintaining tools and shelters. That's it. The rest was leisure, socializing, playing, creating art, telling stories, simply existing. This contradicts everything we've been told about progress. We imagine our ancestors as desperately poor in time and resources, while we're rich and comfortable. But regarding free time, the opposite might be true. A prehistoric human probably enjoyed more leisure hours in a week than most modern people get in a month. If you're watching this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make these videos. Maybe subscribe and let me know. Where are you right now and what time is it? I always check the comments and it's fascinating. Someone in Tokyo at sunrise, someone in London at lunch, someone in California at midnight, all drifting off to the same stories about our shared human past. The more we study prehistoric life, the more complex and nuanced the picture becomes. Yes, there were dangers. Injuries were common and often serious. Infant mortality was high. Infections we'd treat with. Antibiotics could be deadly. Life expectancy was lower than today, though not as low as you might think. If you survived childhood, you had a decent chance of living into your 50s or 60s. Some individuals lived much longer. But here's what really matters. Within those years, people lived full lives. They laughed, loved, mourned, created, struggled, celebrated. They weren't just biological machines optimized for survival. They were human in every sense we understand that word. They had the same fundamental needs we do, food and shelter, yes, but also connection, meaning, beauty, play. So let's walk through a day together. Not a dramatic day with a mammoth hunt or confrontation with a rival group, though those happened too. Just a regular day. An ordinary day 40,000 years ago when an early human woke to the dawn and lived their life in ways both utterly foreign and strangely familiar to how we live ours. Because understanding how our ancestors actually spent their time doesn't just teach us about the past. It raises uncomfortable questions about the present, about how we live now, about what we've gained with civilization, and what we might have lost, about whether progress always means what we think it means. Let's start at the beginning, with that moment when grey light filters into the rock shelter and another prehistoric day begins. You're not waking to an alarm. There are no alarms, no concept of being late, no schedule to keep, no boss waiting. Instead, consciousness returns slowly, naturally, pulled back by the gradual lightening of the sky and the stirring of bodies around you. The first thing you notice is the cold. Not bone-deep, life-threatening winter cold, but that crisp morning chill that makes you reluctant to leave your sleeping spot's warmth. You're lying on dried grasses and animal skins, pressed close to other band members, not necessarily for intimacy, just survival. Body heat is too valuable to waste. The second thing you notice is the smell. Wood smoke. Always wood smoke, though faint now. Last night's fire has died to embers. Mixed with that is the scent of unwashed bodies. Not unpleasant exactly, just human. The smell of rendered animal fat from yesterday's meal. The earthy mineral smell of the rock shelter itself. If you're near the coast, maybe salt air. If you're inland during spring, the green smell of new growth. Someone is already awake. There's always someone awake. Sleep in the Paleolithic wasn't like modern sleep. Evidence from studying modern hunter-gatherers and from sleep research suggests humans probably practiced what scientists call biphasic or polyphasic sleep. You'd sleep for a few hours after dark, then wake for a period in the middle of the night. This wasn't insomnia. This was normal. During that wakeful period, people would talk quietly, tend the fire, check on children, make love, or simply lie there thinking whatever thoughts people think when the world is silent and dark. This meant that, at any given moment during the night, someone was usually awake, someone listening for sounds that didn't belong, the footfall of a predator, the crack of a branch, the distant howl that meant danger was moving through the territory. Safety wasn't something you took for granted. It was something you maintained hour by hour through vigilance and cooperation. The person awake now is feeding the fire. You hear the soft sounds of movement, see the sudden brightening as flames catch on new fuel. Fire management was perhaps the most important skill your people possessed. Let it die completely and you'd have to restart it, either by carrying embers from another group's fire, possibly miles away, or by using friction methods that were exhausting and time-consuming. Better to keep it going. Better to ensure someone always took responsibility for feeding it through the night. Who did that job varied. Sometimes the elderly, who slept lighter anyway and had already proven their worth to the group in countless other ways. Sometimes young adults, particularly those without small children who needed their parents' full attention. Sometimes it rotated, an informal understanding that everyone contributed to the whole survival. As the fire builds, more people begin to stir. Children first, usually. Kids wake up ready to move, ready to play, just like they do now. You hear a small voice, the rustling of bodies, a mother's soft murmur telling a child to stay close, stay warm, wait for the sun. But children are terrible at waiting. Within minutes, a few of the older ones are up, stretching, moving toward the fire, their breath visible in the cold air. The adults wake more slowly. There's no rush. This is important to understand. The entire concept of rushing, of hurrying, of being pressed for time, these are modern inventions. Your day is governed by light, by hunger, by weather, by seasons. The sun is just beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of grey and pink. There are hours before you need to be doing anything in particular. Right now, the most important thing is transitioning from sleep to wakefulness in a way that doesn't waste the precious calories you'll need for whatever the day brings. So people stretch slowly, methodically, working out the stiffness that comes from sleeping on the ground. They yawn, scratch, attend to basic bodily functions. If you're in a rock shelter or cave, there's probably a designated area for waste. Far enough away to avoid contamination, close enough to be safe. If you're in a temporary camp, people simply walk a short distance into the surrounding vegetation. Someone, probably one of the more experienced group members, steps outside the immediate sleeping area to check the surroundings. Not paranoid exactly, but careful. What changed during the night? Are there tracks near the camp that weren't there yesterday? What's the weather doing? Is that cloud formation in the west promising rain or just passing through? Is the wind shifting, bringing different scents, different information about what's happening in the wider world? This morning assessment is crucial. Paleolithic humans were readers of signs in ways we can barely imagine. They could tell from bird behavior whether a predator was nearby. They could read weather patterns days in advance by watching clouds, feeling humidity, noticing how different plants responded to atmospheric changes. They could identify individual animals by their tracks and tell you how long ago they passed, whether they were healthy or injured, alone or part of a herd. All this information gets processed and, importantly, shared. As more people wake and gather around the growing fire, there's conversation. Quiet at first, then building as the group consciousness comes online. Dreams might be discussed. The Paleolithic mind probably didn't draw hard boundaries between dreaming and waking reality. A vivid dream might be interpreted as a message, a warning, a visit from ancestors, worth talking about, worth considering. Plans begin to form, but loosely. The group needs food, but that's always true. The question is what kind of food and where to find it. Someone might have noticed yesterday that certain berry bushes were nearly ripe. Someone else might have seen signs of a large animal moving through a particular valley. A third person might suggest checking fishing spots if you're near water. None of these are orders. Nobody's in charge in the way we think of leadership. Instead, decisions emerge from discussion, from consensus, from individuals choosing to follow those with relevant expertise. But that's still ahead. For now, in these early morning moments, the main activity is simply being together. The band, your extended family, your survival unit, is reassembling after the night's dissolution. Everyone made it through another period of vulnerability. Everyone is here, accounted for, ready for another day. There's comfort in that. Safety in numbers, yes, but also something deeper, something that explains why humans are so fundamentally social. We literally evolved to need each other. Those who felt content in groups, who drew comfort from proximity to kin, who enjoyed cooperation, those were the ones who survived. Their descendants, us, carry genes that make isolation feel wrong and community feel necessary. Children are playing now. Their energy infectious. They're not playing anything structured, nothing with rules, just running, chasing, wrestling. The physical play that builds strength and coordination. The adults watch with half their attention, letting kids be kids, but ready to intervene if play gets too rough or someone wanders too far. Meanwhile, practical concerns are being addressed. Someone is checking tools from yesterday. Is that spear point still secure in its shaft? Did that carrying basket develop any weak spots needing repair? Is there enough cordage for today's needs, or does someone need to spend time making more? These aren't chores in the modern sense, unpleasant tasks you do before getting to what you want to do. They're just part of life, as natural as breathing. And all of it, is happening without any sense of time pressure. The sun is higher now, the morning chill beginning to fade. You've been awake maybe an hour, though you have no way to measure that and no reason to care. Your stomach is starting to remind you it's empty. Other people are probably feeling the same. Soon attention will turn to food, but not yet. For now, you're warm, you're safe. You're surrounded by people who know you and care about your survival, because your survival increases their own chances. This is waking up in the Paleolithic. No sudden jarring into consciousness, no racing to get ready. Just the slow communal transition from sleep to activity, guided by light and bodies, and the ancient rhythms that governed human life for hundreds of thousands of years. It's a pattern so fundamental that we still carry biological echoes of it. That desire to hit snooze, to wake up slowly, to ease into the day rather than attacking it, that's not laziness. That's your Paleolithic brain remembering how mornings used to work, back when we had all the time in the world, and the only schedule that mattered was the movement of the sun across the sky. Let's talk about breakfast, except your ancestors 40,000 years ago didn't have breakfast. Not in the way you think about it. They didn't wake at 7 a.m., stumble to the kitchen and pour themselves cereal. They didn't have meal times at all, not really. They ate when food was available, when hunger demanded it, when opportunity presented itself. This might sound chaotic, but it wasn't. It was perfectly adapted to their reality. Picture yourself waking in that rock shelter as first light filters through the entrance. Your stomach growls. You're hungry, so you eat. Simple as that. What you're eating depends entirely on what's available. Maybe there's leftover meat from 2 days ago when the hunters brought down a red deer. It's been hanging in the cool back of the shelter, away from direct sunlight, wrapped in the deer's own hide. The cold autumn air has kept it from spoiling, though it's starting to develop that slightly gamey smell that means you should probably finish it today. You pull off a strip and chew slowly. It's tough, requires real jaw work, but it's protein and fat. Exactly what your body needs after a night of sleep. Your teeth are strong, your jaw muscles powerful. Dental analysis of Paleolithic skulls shows remarkable wear patterns, evidence of lifetimes spent processing tough foods. But here's what's fascinating. Those same teeth show something else. Microscopic plant residues, starch grains from roots and tubers, phytoliths from seeds and nuts. Your ancestors weren't just eating meat, they were eating everything. Beside the meat there's a wooden bowl, really just a section of bark folded and sealed with pine resin, filled with hazelnuts gathered 3 days ago. You crack a few between your back molars, the technique passed down through generations. Children watch adults do this from infancy, learning the exact angle and pressure needed to crack the shell without crushing the meat inside. Next to the nuts, there's a leather pouch containing dried berries, blackberries gathered during late summer abundance and dried in the sun. They're wrinkled now, concentrated sweetness. You eat a handful. The sugar hits your system immediately, providing quick energy. But the real treasure is the basket of roots near the fire. Someone, probably one of the older women with decades of plant knowledge, dug these up yesterday from the riverbank. They're cattail roots, starchy and nutritious, but basically inedible raw. So they've been placed near the fire, not in it, just close enough that the heat is slowly breaking down tough fibers and converting complex starches into digestible sugars. This is cooking, but not like you know it. No recipes, no precise temperatures, no timers, just knowledge accumulated over thousands of generations about what heat does to different foods. The roots have been sitting there all night, slowly roasting in the residual heat from the fire that never quite goes out. By morning, they're soft enough to eat, sweet enough to enjoy. You pull one out, careful not to burn your fingers. It's hot but manageable. You peel away the outer layer and bite into the flesh. It's not delicious by modern standards, but it's filling, and more importantly, it's safe. Raw, these roots contain toxins that would give you a nasty stomachache. Cooked, they're perfectly edible. This transformation, turning inedible plants into food through fire, might be one of the most important technological breakthroughs in human history. It effectively doubled or tripled the number of plant species your ancestors could eat. Tubers that were toxic raw became staple foods when roasted. Seeds that would pass through the digestive system unchanged became valuable nutrition when ground and heated. The evidence for this incredible dietary diversity comes from multiple sources. Coprolites, fossilized feces, have been found at archaeological sites across Europe and Africa. When scientists analyze them under microscopes, they find an astonishing variety of plant remains: seeds from dozens of different species, pollen from flowers, microscopic fragments of leaves, roots, and bark. Some coprolites show evidence of insects: grasshoppers, beetle larvae, termites. These might seem unappetizing to modern Western palates, but they're actually excellent sources of protein and fat. Many contemporary hunter-gatherer societies consider insects delicacies, and there's no reason to think your ancestors felt differently. Dental calculus, the hardened plaque that builds up on teeth, tells a similar story. When archaeologists scrape it off, Paleolithic skulls, and examine it under high-powered microscopes, they find plant starches from across the spectrum: wild grains, root vegetables, nuts, berries, even plant fibers that were probably chewed to extract moisture, or soften them for other uses. What emerges from all this evidence is a picture of incredible dietary flexibility. Your ancestors weren't specialized. They were opportunists, capable of exploiting virtually any food source in their environment. Coastal groups ate fish, shellfish, seaweed, seabirds, and sea mammals, supplemented with whatever plants grew near the shore. Inland forest dwellers ate deer, wild boar, nuts, berries, roots, and mushrooms. Groups living near rivers ate fish, waterfowl, aquatic plants, and the land animals that came to drink. This flexibility was crucial for survival. Environments change, seasons shift, animal migrations follow unpredictable patterns. A group that could only eat one or two types of food would starve when those resources became scarce. But a group that could eat 50 different things, they'd always find something. As you're eating your morning meal, others are doing the same. The young mother is sharing nuts with her toddler, showing him how to crack them, how to pick out the meat without getting shell fragments. He's not very good at it yet, his small hands lack the strength and coordination, but he's learning. In a few years, he'll be teaching his own younger siblings. The old woman is preparing something more complex. She's taken some of the leftover meat and is pounding it between two stones, mixing it with rendered fat and dried berries. She's making pemmican, though she doesn't call it that. It's just food that lasts, concentrated nutrition that can be carried on long journeys or stored for lean times. This is knowledge, technical and precise. The ratio of meat to fat to berries has to be right or it spoils. The pounding has to be thorough or it doesn't bind together. She learned this from her mother, who learned it from hers, a chain of knowledge transmission stretching back thousands of generations.